National Construction Authority is a government agency created by an Act of Parliament, Act number 41 of 2011. So we've been in existence actively from around 2013, so about 7 years. And the main mandate why this institution was created by an Act of Parliament is to oversee the construction industry and coordinate its development. So that is the overall mandate. But if you look at what we do specifically, I'll not break them down the way they are in the Act, but I want to ensure that wananchi are able to understand what we do. We do three key things under our many functions. One of them is a regulatory mandate, and under regulatory mandate, we register contractors. Contractors are those who are engaged to undertake the business of construction, be it construction in building works, construction in road works, construction in electrical works, any type of construction you talk about, even dams or railway. So these are the people whom, for them to undertake that kind of business of construction, must get a license from National Construction Authority. And this is for both contractors who are locally within the country and even those who come from outside as foreign contractors. They must get license from National Construction Authority for them to be able to undertake that business of construction. The other second regulatory mandate within that first pillar is basically accreditation of construction workers. This is where those who are now employed by the so-called contractors that I've mentioned up there get an accreditation license, meaning that they are qualified to do the work they're supposed to do as fundis, as you may know it. And this includes both accreditation of construction workers and site supervisors. So in a nutshell, they are supposed to get a license that gives them the mandate to act professionally or do professional jobs, whatever they do, whether they are plumbers or masons or electricians, and so on and so forth. And then we also register projects. This is a requirement by law where any developer, before commencement of any construction works, must bring their project for registration, apply for registration at National Construction Authority for purposes of getting a compliance certificate. Remember, compliance certificate means that they have complied with all the other regulatory requirements, including county approval, where that is required, including other approvals like either environmental body, and so on and so forth. So by the time they come to us, it means they have met all the other requirements for them to be able to be registered, for those projects to be able to be registered by National Construction Authority. And then lastly, on the regulatory mandate, we do what we call quality assurance. This is where we now visit construction sites that are ongoing, and if we find any issue that is not in compliance with whatever you have registered, or even a project that is not registered with us, we mark that famous, you put that famous mark called X, the red X, that is known for NCA. Though that's not our logo, but apparently people know us for putting X's along buildings. So in a nutshell, that's our regulatory mandate. But the other second thing is capacity building. And capacity building is where we now train the contractors we've registered. We also train the construction workers and the site supervisors that we have accredited. And this is a requirement so that a contractor, in any year they're holding a license, they must attend a training so that their license is renewed at the end of the year. Because these licenses expire at the end of every year, the package license. So for them to renew their licenses, they must have attended a training organized by NCA or in collaboration organized by those partners of NCA in terms of training. And then lastly is advisory. Advisory mandate means that even today, if any stakeholder is looking at an opportunity to be advised on any matters regarding construction or certain things that they would want to find out, they will come to NCA and pick that information. Remember, from all that I've explained, there is so much information we collect that can be used to advise the industry on what needs to be done. So we have a regulatory mandate, capacity building mandate, and advisory mandate, amongst many of the functions that we do. But all I wanted to emphasize is that all these functions I've mentioned are actually available online. So from the comfort of where you are, what you need is a device, an internet, to be able to get our services from National Construction Authority.
Okay, so from all the things that you've explained this morning, can we just look at the country, for example, and ask for every construction that is either taking place now, has been on hold, or has been completed, each and every one should have essentially gone through the NCA. Is that what we're saying?
Correct. That's the correct position.
Okay, so if you were to take a walk along Mombasa Road, for example, or even further up, maybe one of the dormitory towns of Nairobi, one of the dormitory areas, Syokimau, Kitengela, every construction that is taking place, for example, should have been given the prerequisite license by the NCA or should be operating under such?
Any construction that came into being from around 2011, when the Act was created, should have complied with all the necessary requirements of the law and should have received a compliance certificate for them to have even commenced that construction work. And that is what is expected, so that when we carry out those quality assurance checks and we find something is missing or a gap for that matter, then it causes us to issue a suspension notice to the extent that now, until you meet the requirements, then we cannot allow you to proceed with the construction works.
So what happens in the cases where, for example, buildings collapse, as we have seen this has happened quite a lot, and when the due diligence is done or where investigations are carried out, something is seen to have gone wrong? How is that dealt with? Something is seen to have gone wrong in the issuing of a license, in the proper investigation having been carried out to make sure that this was a viable project. What happens in cases like that? Because we seem to see buildings collapse and then, we just carry on with business as usual.
The owner of the building is sought and arrested, and that's it.
And that's it. The owner of the building is arrested. We saw a school collapse in August last year. Owner of the building was asked a few questions. That's done and dusted. We move on. It seems that that's the order of the day. Something terrible happens, a building collapses, people die, there's an evacuation, it's done. What should be the process?
Well, a couple of issues have been raised in the questions you've put across, and I want to start by saying that buildings have been collapsing, and even structures have been collapsing. Building, because of the nature of their criticality, because buildings house people. But also there are other cases where you have structures collapsing, like you could have a dam collapsing, you could have a bridge collapsing, and so on and so forth. So these are challenges that have come across from time to time. But remember, there are many causes that lead to a building collapsing or a structure collapsing. It could either be a deficiency in terms of the quality of material. It could either be workmanship or poor workmanship, as you may call it, which is a contribution to the level of skill set and even the capacity of the executing team or the implementing team. It could also be as a result of a misstep. But more so, all this happen if there is a gap even in terms of quality control or even quality assurance process as the progress of construction goes on. So, in a nutshell, to be able to answer your question, there are procedures or processes that are supposed to be done. When a structure collapses, the first thing to be done is investigation to establish the cause of the collapse. And during that time, of course, when investigations are going on, the first issue or culprits normally are the actors of that particular project or construction. In this case, we would have the client or the developer. It would have also the professional team, either the engineer, the architect, or the contractor who are involved, and all the players. So until the investigation is complete to iron out who was actually the culprit, then that is the time an action will be taken based on the finding of that investigation. But in a nutshell, there are many causes towards the collapse of a building that can, when investigated, the culpability level will be identified. But I want to say this. In March of this year, 2020, there is an amendment of National Construction Authority Act under the Business Laws Amendment Act of 2020, which now gave provision for legal action against those found culpable for actions of either not having followed the law or not having followed the suspensions that we issue from time to time. This now means that if somebody is issued with a suspension notice as a developer and they do not comply and they are taken to court and the judge finds them culpable, they can either be fined a fine of not more than 1 million or a jail term of not more than 3 years, or both, depending on how the judge may determine the case. So this now gives some teeth, if I may call it, to be able to ensure that people are more alert and able to comply, because now there is a penalties provision in place.
Are you saying that before
also,
you didn't have the teeth? You didn't actually have the tools to enforce this?
We had a tool to the extent that we could issue as many times as suspension notices, but beyond there was nothing specific that we could do against anybody who continued defying, those whom we may refer as rogue or perennial defiance.
What about revoking their licenses?
That is for contractors. That exists. After the board has carried out investigation and found a contractor culpable, they may take any action, 3 of them, either to revoke the license or suspend the license for a period of time, or just caution the contractor. But remember, for the developer, there was nothing specific. But this particular amendment now cuts across all the players in the construction industry as far as the penalty provision is concerned.
What role does the NCA have in construction that relates directly to industries?
That is to mean factories?
Factories.
Yeah. Now, you see, Latif, construction...
this is CT Muga, not Latif.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
It's all right.
No, Latif is actually very happy to be referred to all the time, so it's perfectly okay. Yeah.
No problem. Let me say this. Construction is just a process, but it refers to any other product you get at the end of the construction. Whether you're constructing a factory or an industry, as you may call it, whether you're constructing a road, or whether you're constructing a domestic dwelling unit, or a commercial center, or a power line, or a dam, all this is part of what we regulate as National Construction Authority.
Right.
So, to that regard, we have a role as far as construction of industries or factories are concerned, to the extent that they follow the required guidelines and the procedures and the regulatory regime of the construction rules.
Do these rules also encompass the environmental concerns that normally go with industrial constructions?
Yes, and this is where I said what National Construction Authority does at the time of project registration, before commencement of that construction work, is to issue a compliance certificate after the project owner has applied for the same. And when they're applying for this construction for compliance certificate, we expect one of the main requirements, among many others, is a NEMA license. So we normally ask for NEMA license as a proof of having received the nod from an environmental body to give you the green light to proceed with that construction work. So they'll have looked at all the requirements that will interact or affect the environment, to the extent that at our end, we ensure that you've gotten the NEMA license, but we go beyond that extent. We also even do a due diligence to confirm that the license they have presented is also in order.
What does the due diligence involve?
There's a lot of collaboration.
This due diligence that you say you conduct with the NEMA, what exactly does it involve, the details of it? Let me explain why I'm asking the question, because in the recent past, we've had many cases of industries that have run afoul of the law because they have actually, in the process of doing what they do, they've been causing harm to the people who live in the environment. Meaning it is clear that whatever they were doing, there were certain environmental conditions they had not met. That's the background from which I'm asking the question.
I get it, but I also want to answer giving 3 types of stages or scenarios.
Yes.
There is, during construction, there is what we call pre-construction conditional requirements. There is during construction requirements, and there are what we call after construction requirements. Now, when you get the license, and I don't want to talk on behalf of our sister agency, NEMA, but all I know is that during when the license is issued, normally there are a lot of conditionalities given that the project implementing team, including the contractor, the professional team, and even the developer, are supposed to comply with, so that by the end of that particular process of construction, they have they have done what is required. I'll give you a very simple example. The construction, even during preparing the access to get to the construction site, or even during the site clearance, there are so many requirements that are supposed to be done. At that stage, when we come for a quality assurance check, we'll be looking at, because you'll be about the license, so we'll be looking at whether you are complying with all those requirements. And that now borders to even environmental safety. And when we talk about health and safety, we look at all that. Now, during construction stage, there are also other issues to do with either dust pollution and so on and so forth. And then post-construction, during the operation of the facility that was being constructed, again, there are many other environmental requirements that are supposed to be looked into. So in a nutshell, you need to look at it in each stage and find out what were the conditions given and if those conditions are being complied with. And that's why even NEMA has a mandate to also continually keep inspecting to find out that the conditions they gave are being complied with.
I hear you have said that it was one of my questions in terms of who you collaborate with. So NEMA has come up, quite often. So let's say that, there is a construction that's taking place in a particular area. And we know for a fact that it doesn't have any licensing, but those who've continued to put up this construction have said they're going to continue anyway, and they'll sort it out. Meaning that somebody has been seen, as we like to say, for this construction to continue. What would then be the recourse by the NCA if you come and then find that this construction went up without the proper licensing? And if in the unfortunate event that something should happen, what would be the recourse taken? I'm giving this scenario based on an actual thing that's going on now. So I would just like to know, as it's playing out now, what then would be the recourse?
Yeah, a very good question. And remember, we are in a country where we have very good laws and legal systems. And the question is valid to the extent that what is the recourse? Now, as I've told you, from March of this year, the recourse is now very clearly, the framework is very clear and very straightforward, to the extent that if we issue a suspension notice to the extent that there is no compliance by that developer that for the construction they are undertaking, we give them 14 days to comply with the requirements, and failure to do so, and we will take a legal action. And the matter will be taken to court, which is now justice system. And if they are found culpable, as I've said, of course, they'll either be fined a fine not exceeding 1 million, or a jail term of not more than 3 years, or both, depending on what the judge may find. And this is now something that will be for us very effective in terms of enhancing our enforcement and enhancing even the level of quality out there, because people now will be saying, hey, wait a minute, you see, now we can't do this because there will be a straight action, straight jacket action that will be taken against us if we don't comply.
I think the questions that emerge out of this, Engineer Akech, is on the issue of your capacity, because you clearly are in charge of every new project that's coming up across the country. The question that I want to ask after we come out of this break is, do you have that capacity? And how many officers do you have on the ground who are conducting all these inspections, quality assurance and all? We are speaking with Engineer Maurice Akech. He's Executive Director and the Registrar of Contractors at the National Construction Authority. We are talking about the construction sector, the enforcement of the regulations in this sector, what the regulations are, and how this sector should be operating. This is a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation on Spice FM, on KTN Home, and online, www.spicefm.co.ke, as well as Spice FM KE, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We are speaking with Engineer Maurice Akech. He's Executive Director and Registrar of Contractors at the National Construction Authority. And the National Construction Authority basically is the body mandated to license any form of construction happening in the country. And Engineer Akech has just told us, from your domestic house to factories to residential estates to dams to electric power, every construction that's happening in the country should first get approval and license by the National Construction Authority, which then afterwards needs to conduct regular inspections for quality assurance and to ensure that you're complying with the license that's given to you and with all the conditionalities that are given. Now, the question that I said we're going to ask as we come back out of this break, Engineer Akech, what is your capacity around the country to enforce this?
Thank you for that question, and I want to address it in threefold. Capacity can be viewed in many areas. One of them I want to talk about is coverage capacity. By this I mean how spread are we across the country. The other second part of it is the resource capacity in terms of how resourced are we to be able to offer a quality job in terms of enforcement and what we do, and in terms of oversighting the construction sector. And the other capacity is in terms of the human skill, or whatever you want to call it. So let me start from the coverage capacity. I want to confirm that we are now across the entire nation, and we serve the nation from 27 nodes across the country, where we have offices in 27 locations across our country, from the far north to the far east, from the west to the south, and all this is served from those regions, and all those nodes are headed by regional coordinators that are also in charge. So this is for purposes of quality assurance, and where you need a physical inspection visit from time to time. But remember, we also have 52 Huduma centers across the country, where we have officers in those Huduma centers for what we call the last mile. This is where they interact with those who have to do with the physical visit to our offices that require maybe inquiries, we want to ask questions, and they'll be assisted. So this is the first port of call whenever you want an NCA service, and you are maybe not able to go through. I mean, you tried online, and maybe because of either a challenge or so, you're not able to. So you visit any Huduma center, you'll find NCA staff there, and you'll be able to be assisted.
So these are the offices that you have around the country. Now, the next thing you said is the resource capacity.
Yes. So in terms of resource capacity, this is where now you're talking about the human numbers, and you asked how many staff are we? How many are we in terms of staff? We are more than 350 strong staff employed by National Construction Authority, and these are also spread across those offices I've talked about, supported by the headquartered office at KCB Towers in Upper Hill. That's where our headquarters is. And we also have vehicles that we use from those offices to do quality assurance inspections and visits to be able to undertake our activity.
How many vehicles do you actually have?
We have 45 vehicles across that support works in these offices, and they actually also have capacity to go to rough terrain, because construction does not happen on next to a road. So some of them happen in the middle of nowhere, and they must be accessed. So we have vehicles that have, even in terms of capacity of the vehicle to access the construction site, that is there. But the other issue I want to talk about is about the technology. Remember, we already put our services online. So in terms of capacity, in terms of how can you reach us online, so that we don't need to just work on the personnel numbers. We're also talking about the technology in a way that from the comfort of our offices, we're able to receive as many applications as possible. We don't need to see a queue. You remember an online queue is much easier to manage than a physical queue. So with this, it also gives us the opportunity to serve as many Kenyans as possible through the applications we receive online.
Thank you very much for the way you're answering this question, Engineer. You're clearly an engineer. You're very methodical. You start from...
Systematic.
Very, very systematic. Now, let's look at the 350 staff that you have in the 27 regional offices and their capacity. So practically, how many buildings or how many projects is one officer supposed to be in charge of in terms of inspecting and ensuring that they're complying?
Well, now I think this is something that is keen to our work plan, and I want to confirm that every year we have what we call our targets, performance contract targets that is set by the government, and I want to confirm that for instance, this year we have set ourselves to carry out inspections for about 20,000 construction sites across the country. So if you divide those 20,000 over the 12 months over the number of staff we have this case, the technical staff. That's what they're supposed to cover within the year, from 1st July 2020 to 30th June 2021 next year.
How did how do you arrive at the 20,000 figure? This is against a backdrop of how many constructions happening in the country?
Yes, it's a good question. It is based on, first of all, the past numbers we have covered. It's also based on the current business environment and the number of constructions that are going on. So it's normally something that is a target that is set based on some statistical numbers.
So maybe I should just ask this one directly, maybe from the very beginning. How many constructions do you license in a year?
That depends on also how many project owners or the developers or people who want to undertake a construction investment apply. But
I'm assuming you don't license the owners. You actually license a specific project.
We for purposes of project construction, we give compliance certificates to the owner. The responsibility of application of a project registration, so that you get a compliance certificate, which is the ultimate document to get at the end, lies with the project owner. So we look at the owners in this case for purposes of project registration. But for construction, the execution of the work itself, the owner needs to have identified a contractor who is already licensed by NCA, who now will be part of that particular project to implement the project for them.
When you talk about application, are you suggesting perhaps that there are people who actually begin the process without being licensed or without seeking approval?
Yes. That's why we exist to carry out inspections and quality assurance checks to check that they have either done that application or they have not done. Some of the non-compliant activities we come across, or cases we come across out there, is a developer having not applied for a project to be registered by NCA. So yes, sometimes they carry out work without doing that, and those are some of the.
Is that why we then see the big red X sometimes? Is that the reason?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the reason we put the red X, among other reasons, like lack of safety, lack of a qualified contractor, lack of not having a professional, and so on and so forth. Not having a critical construction worker, and so on and so forth.
Talking of construction workers, is it mandatory for all construction sites to actually insure their workers? In
terms of insurance,
yes.
We have a contractual requirement, which is called mostly it's a standard practice in construction contracts, where a contractor must have what we call work injury benefit, that is the WIBA, which is something they must take out as an insurance before they begin construction work. This is very important for the safety of our construction workers and supervisors and anybody who is within that site and under the purview of the contractor doing the construction work. Because should they get injured, it is this particular insurance that will be able to cushion or help cater for whatever costs that may arise and compensation thereof.
So are we suggesting therefore that all the constructions that have received the nod from NCA insure their workers?
Yes, when a developer or a client or a project owner is applying for a project registration, one of the documents they must submit to us is what we call a contract or evidence of an engagement with a contractor. And that contract normally has a provision for WIBA. WIBA is a very standard practice. That is work injury benefits that they must take out for purposes of compensation whenever an injury may occur.
Okay. Engineer Akech, sorry. When you talked a few minutes ago about the fact that then each individual who's working on a construction, for example, must have something you called compliance, right? A compliance certificate, something that they should have. But we have quite a number of, I would call them ad hoc constructions that take place. So it's really anybody who is able to work comes along and works on a construction. Put that in a box for just a second. If we look at constructions that take place in other countries in the world and something happens, for example, there was a building collapse in a European country last year, and they could get down to the very individual who did not put a particular bolt in a certain place, and they were able to call out that individual because of that, down to the nitty-gritty. In this country, just now looking at capacity and other things that you've mentioned, can we be sure that you can have this kind of razor sharp capacity, razor sharp oversight when it comes to something as sensitive as this in Kenya?
Well, what is expected, and it's a very good point you raised, is by click of a button, just by a click of a button at the comfort of your computer, and that information, we call it information warehouse or a data warehouse like National Construction Authority. By a click of a button, you are supposed to see who are the individuals involved in any particular project. I'll give you a very good example. For instance, if today you're doing your house, and I'll start with your house as an example, or if you're doing another one, in case you already have one, what is expected is that you bring that project for registration at National Construction Authority. So first of all, you will know that you are the owner. Number two, you will also indicate who is the contractor. So you will know which contractor is going to build it. And at the end of it, we'll know which contractor built it. Number three, we'll also know which professionals you've engaged, like who is the architect, who is the engineer, who is the quantity surveyor. And they must also accept that, yes, they are the owners. I mean, they have accepted to be the part and parcel of that project team to offer professional responsibility or advice during construction. And then all this given, we'll also continue carrying out quality assurance inspections, visits, until and when the construction is over. We'll even know that you also have county approval for that particular house you're building. We'll also know that you received the NEMA license and so on and so forth. So by click of a button, we'll be able to get all this information together. And if anything happens, we'll know which parties were involved in that particular project. So in a nutshell, the answer is yes, that by complying with all the requirements by National Construction Authority, you're actually putting yourself to the level of accountability, level of responsibility, to the extent that you will not mind people knowing who did that project and who was involved, so that in case anything happens, you can easily be contacted, and the right action or questions will be taken depending on what issue has happened. So that is a very that's the expectation that as National Construction Authority, we have all the information about any project happening in this country.
Talking about information of all the projects, does the NCA concern itself with the source of funding that developers have when putting up their constructions? I ask this because many anti-corruption agencies in this country have, should we say, we have read accounts of allegations that a lot of money that perhaps may have been received through corrupt means have ended up in the construction industry.
Well, to the extent of funding, what NCA looks out for when you submit your project when a developer submits a project for registration in order to get a compliance certificate, what NCA looks out for is the value of that project. What they call the contract value. How much is it going to cost for you to put up that project? But it is something you've raised that is very important, very interesting. That do we find out actually where is the source of that funding? So the answer is no. What we ask is how much is it going to cost? Yeah. But where the money is going to come from, that one we've not looked at it in the past. But I also want to explain something. You raised something which I need to clarify to Wananchi, the issue of the documents we issue and the compliance certificate. So there are three things that, in terms of what we call it, what I would call papers or certificates coming from National Construction Authority. When I visit a construction site, I expect to see a compliance certificate. Compliance certificate is for the project which was issued to the developer that indicates what's the project name, who is the contractor, and so on and so forth. So that is issued for the project. So I do not expect everyone on that side to have it. It's a one single document that is pinned somewhere, but we also have it on our system. Okay. The second paper we issue is the contractor on that project needs to have an NCA license. So in that regard, I will expect that contractor to have NCA license valid for the period the construction is taking place. And then The other document I expect to find on site is an accreditation card, which should be held by each skilled construction worker and each construction site supervisor to the extent of how many there are. So if there are 10, I need to find 10 of those. If there are 20, I need to find 20 of those. But compliance certificate is one, contractor certificate is one, or if there are more than one contractor, then to the number of the contractors on that site.
Yeah.
So those are the documents we issue as NCA. Thank you.
And Engineer Akech, I've got to really acknowledge here the fact that this organization has been in place since around 2011 to 2013, right? And already having 27 offices around the country, having over 300 staff around the country, it's something we cannot just sit back and say, okay,
very commendable.
You've not done anything. I mean, you've really moved somewhere. But I want to come back to the issue of your capacity, because this is where, when something goes wrong, we all point our guns at the National Construction Authority and ask, where were you when this was happening? And I'm just looking at this and saying, you'll issue a compliance certificate because somebody has come to your office to apply, and when they're coming to your office, they have to produce everything else. They have to produce the local county authorization, they have to produce NEMA authorization and everything. And as long as the paper checks, then you are also able to see, all right, so this is a project that we can authorize. But when it comes to enforcement and checking quality assurance and quality control, and this is where now officers need to have boots on the ground, I still need to come back and ask, 350 officers around the country, looking at all the construction that is happening in the country, from domestic homes. Like, you've just given an example of Ndu constructing her third home. I think she already has two, constructing her third home, and all these others. Are your officers actually able to be there and see when things are going wrong before they go wrong?
Yes, and two approaches to that question. One, if the developer did the right thing and came to NCA for project registration, will automatically flag it off from day one that because of this particular application, we are aware it's going to start, and now we put it as part of our things to do within the quality assurance visit framework. Two, if earlier you had asked that you just do it without bringing it to the attention of NCA, it has not sought any approval whatsoever. In that case, we'll just stumble on it, that yes, we were visiting our site and we came across a project, and yet it was not even registered by NCA. In that regard, we will take necessary action. But what I'm saying is that when you talk about capacity, I want to confirm that for all projects registered by National Construction Authority, we are able to know where they are, and we're able to visit them during and carry out inspection during the construction work. Remember that amendment that I talked about of the NCA Act and the Business Laws Amendment Act of 2020 also has included a very important provision that makes inspections mandatory, meaning that as a developer, you are duty bound to seek out for National Construction Authority to come and inspect your works or your project, your construction project, and even NCA is also duty bound to visit those projects to be able to ensure that they are being done the right way. So this amendment is the key to the enforcement that we're talking about.
Are you saying, engineer, that somebody who's constructing a new building somewhere in Ntarara, Loitoktok, is duty bound to seek the inspection by NCA, and NCA should come and inspect?
That is correct. And because Loitoktok is in Kenya, and we have an office that can access Loitoktok at a very short time and notice, and we are able to get there. And that particular.
So, in how long would this request be honored?
We have our service charter. We talk of depending on the requests. Some will take 2 days, but we are within a maximum of 7 days. We'll have reached out to you whenever you call upon us. So I'm asking all Kenyans that let's be responsible. Let's ensure that whatever we do is for our own sake and the safety of those who will occupy it, or the security of the investors, so that at least you don't have to suffer losing it after you put up investment using hard-earned money.
Let's talk about COVID now. I mean, because this is the reality that we have, the reality of our days. You have very many workers that maybe have gone through the entire accreditation process to work in the construction industry. But with COVID now, with the very many people who are losing their jobs, one of the things that they may end up doing is finding a job in the construction sector. And yet maybe they haven't gone through that whole accreditation process or certification.
Let me answer it this way. And first of all, it is a fact that COVID has affected many sectors, and construction is not an exception. And if you look at globally, and coming back to our country, there is a reduction in the number of even projects being registered by National Construction Authority. That's really an indication that things have been affected. Talking numbers, if you look at when COVID started, the first case that was reported around mid-March 2020, and so if you look at March to June 2020, and March to June 2019, and March to June 2018, you would, I want to confirm that 2018 to 2019, there was an increase in the project registered by NCA. But March to June of 2020, there's a reduction by 35%. And when we expected an increase, there was instead a reduction, meaning that that was already a disruption in the number of projects being undertaken in the country, because this is now what we rely on in terms of statistical data. So this has disrupted also the supply chain of construction materials. And the question you asked was about laborers and the construction workers. So even the labor has been affected. And this now means that the construction workers who are part of the critical fabric of our construction industry have also been affected by the COVID pandemic. So also funds to do with construction some of them have been diverted either to deal with the COVID and so on and so forth. And there's also an issue with fluctuation of prices in terms of the building. So in a nutshell, COVID has affected the industry a great deal, to the extent that some projects have been closed, some have slowed down, and some have actually been temporarily put on hold. So in a nutshell, there's a reduction in the number of activities in the construction industry, and this affects the construction workers as well.
Maybe a final question for you, engineer, is that does this not then also present an opportunity to clean up in terms of policy, or to make sure that things are standing as they should be then when it comes to construction around the country, or increasing capacity, or making sure that you're working on certain things while there is this downtime across the world? Is this not an opportunity to make sure that policies then will be adhered to when things pick up again?
A very good point. In fact, it has brought us to the level where now we are looking ourselves as an industry regulator. We are looking ourselves as a country, and we are saying that we look at the issue of risks and risk management. This is the time now we are working on even plans that can be used to caution in terms of even offering training for the industry. Remember, before I answer your question, there is that requirement for contractors to be trained. And previously we were doing it physically. So because of COVID, it has now given us an opportunity to relook at our mode of deliveries, our strategies in terms of how do we reach out to our stakeholders. So we are now doing more online formulation of online programs that we can still be able to continue offering our services, especially where we need physical interaction, especially the training and the acquisition, that we also sometimes have to visit sites to reach out to the construction workers, so that at least going forward, even when we are affected, we can still be able to offer those services. So yes, there's an opportunity in terms of upgrading our online activities to be able to reach out to our stakeholders, even as we have the pandemic with us.
Sure.
Indeed, every cloud has a silver lining. This is what they say. This is an opportunity for all of us as a country to learn, take up the lessons, and learn something new with this COVID-19 pandemic and what it has brought on us. Thank you very much, Engineer Maurice Akech, for speaking to us this morning, and we wish you all the best with the works at the National Construction Authority.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And I also thank Wanai for listening.
We
And I
will
hope,
we will hope that you'll
reach
be
out
able to come to the show again at some point, engineer.
Thank you. I'll be looking forward to that opportunity again. Thank you very much.
Asante sana. Engineer Maurice Akech is the Executive Director and Registrar of Contractors at the National Construction Authority.